How y'all doing? I'm the Watchman, and this is part three of the sin that caused the devil's downfall from grace. The sin that caused the devil's downfall from grace. And we're just gonna hop right into it. We left off in part two where we see that through giving heed to the devil and entertaining him, as the angels did, a third of them end up being cast out of heaven with him, because I want to reiterate, when you entertain the devil or give heed to his words or thoughts, it gives him a chance to find a spot or a spot where he can hook a line onto and draw you to himself. When you give heed to the devil or you entertain the devil, it gives him a spot where he can find a line to hook onto and draw you to himself. You know what I mean? So that is how he drew a third of the angels from heaven. And now we see he's in the garden. We left off where he's in the garden now. And he's talking to Eve. He's talking to Eve. And first off, we see we're going to be in Genesis 3:3. Genesis 3, chapter 3. Well, we're going to start at verse 2. But we see that she is already entertaining the devil. She's already entertaining the devil. And before we really start, I want to say that how many times do we often think that we're strong enough to be in certain situations, watch certain things, be around certain people? We think we're strong enough to overcome them temptations or watch out, or, if this happens, I'm not going to do it. I'm good, I'm straight. That is the same mentality that Eve had. And that is the same mentality that the angels that fell from grace, though, that is the same mentality that they had too. That, I can sit here. I'm gonna just hear what he says. I don't want to be rude to him. I don't want to be rude and tell him I don't want to hear that. I'm gonna hear what he says. That same mentality of, oh, I'm strong enough. I'm strong enough. I got this. I got this. The devil loves that mentality. He loves that mentality, as we see. But anyway, Eve right here is conversating with the devil. She's conversating with the devil. And like we know, one of his biggest tool is that what he loves to preach, self-righteousness. Self-righteousness. But we're gonna get to that, how he slips that on in there to her. But anyway, let's get to it. We're gonna read again. Matter of fact, we're gonna start at verse 1. Genesis 3, verse 1. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, have God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? Now see, the devil right there, point proven, he's just making conversation. He knows what God has said. He was there, he heard it. You know what I mean? He knew that God said, you better not eat of this tree. You know what I mean? So he's making conversation. He's getting her to entertain him, getting on especially when you conversate or you entertain something, your senses come less dull to it. Basically, he was getting her comfortable with him. He was getting her comfortable with him. How many times are we doing something or watching something, or going someplace we're not supposed to go? The first time we're real uncomfortable, but after a while we start getting more comfortable and more comfortable and more comfortable. Anyway, verse 3. Well, verse 2. And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. Lest ye die. And I want y'all to remember that last part where she says, Neither shall ye touch it. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Verse 4. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. Now remember, the devil hates God's character. And we know that God's character, God's law is God's character. Have you seen that? The command was, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. Already in verse 4 we see, And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. What did he do right there? The devil just called God a liar. Subliminally, sometimes, and we not knowing it, sometimes we can call God a liar in our little personal, well, I believe, the Bible says that, but I believe this and this and this. We have to be careful because sometimes we can call God a liar and not even know it. But right here, the devil is clearly calling God a liar. Eve just said, God said, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. If you eat of it, if you touch it, you're gonna die. And the serpent immediately says, ye shall not surely die, calling God a liar. See, because they're comfortable now. They're comfortable now, so he can, you know, if he would have just came out, if that would have been his first words to her, God is a liar. Don't believe what he told you. She probably wouldn't have been, as let's just, it wouldn't have worked. She would have immediately, I need to leave you alone. You just call, but because she has entertained him and she's comfortable with him now, now he's slipping on in even further. He's slipping on in even further. All right. Verse 5, the devil is telling Eve, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be open, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Wow. First he calls God a liar, saying, you're not really going to die. And then, has she cut him off yet? No, she's sitting here listening to him. Then, now he starts in on his sermon of self-righteousness. Now he starts feeding her self-righteousness. What he says, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be open. See, now he's putting the emphasis on her, on self. On self. He says, your eyes. Your eyes shall be open. He's making her think on selfish things now. Don't you want your eyes to be open? Don't you want to see? Don't you want to see more than what you're seeing? He's getting her to think selfishly now. Then your eyes, and ye shall be as gods. Now remember, that is the whole reason why the devil fell. That's the meaning of self-righteousness, is meaning you don't have to live by God's rules or laws to be a good person. I think that's how he got the angels to fall. He didn't come out right to the angels and say, yo, I'm about to go corrupt the world with sin, and I'm be this wicked demon monster. Little kids gonna die as a result of it, and women and children and families gonna be broken. There's gonna be tears, destruction. Come die with me. He didn't come at the angels and say, come die with me. He actually came at them this very same way and said, you can be good angels without God's law. Basically, you being your own God. You can be your own God. Now, as we see right here, verse 5, this is the same motto. This is the same food that he's feeding Eve. You can be as gods. You can be your own God. All you have to do is break God's commandment. God's commandment was to not eat of the fruit, not touch the fruit. And he says, you can be as gods. All you have to do is break God's command. Ooh, the devil hates God's commandments. And as we see, that is the first thing he attacks in the world. Do you think he stopped doing that now? Because I tell you, it saddens me. I get people all the time say, well, why do you stress? Why do you stress the law? Why do you even speak on the commandments? And I say, I'm not the one who wrote the commandments. I'm not the one who said follow the commandments. God did. God did. And knowing that the law is God's character, if we're to be Christ-like, shouldn't you want to, any way you can get closer to God, that should be your want and desire. That should be your want and desire. Because like the devil knows, if you have a land, if you have a city, and there's no law in the city, you're going to have a lawless city. And what's the devil's nickname in the word? That man of lawlessness, that worker of iniquity. But anyway, let's get right back to it. But as we see right here, he's saying, you can be as God, knowing good and evil. All you have to do is disobey God's commandment. All you have to do is disobey God's commandment. Verse 6. And when the woman saw, now she done sat here and took all this sermon in that he's feeding her, the little sermon of self-righteousness, dwelt on it. She done thought about it. Now look what it says in verse 6. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, she is pure selfishness. Now I'm going to show you. Before, if you go up to verse 2, and the woman said unto the serpent, we may eat. She's thinking of her and Adam, then she goes into God. She's not thinking selfishly. But as we see, now that she done entertained the devil, done sat and talked with him, done thought and dwelled on what he told her. Now we see in verse 6, she says, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, food for who? Food for herself. She's thinking about her appetite. That's one thing she's thinking selfishly on. She's putting God to the side for selfish reasons now. And these are her selfish excuses. We always give excuses to do wrong, right? Well, I was hungry. This is what, now that she sees the tree is good for food, she's thinking selfishly herself. Got all these other trees and all this other fruit, but she's going, listen. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and two, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, whose eyes? Her eyes. She's in that eye mentality now. Remember, there's a war between two letters. I'm going to get to that in a minute. She's in that eye, thinking about herself. Whose eyes was it pleasant to? It became pleasant to her eyes. Now before, when she kept God in front of her face, now remember, the devil fell from heaven because he took his eyes off of God and placed him on himself. And we see that is how he got Eve right now. He got Eve to take her eyes off of God in his command and placed them on herself. The minute she took her eyes off of God, the tree became good for food. And the minute she took her eyes off of God, it says that then the fruit became pleasant to the eyes. Before, when her eyes was on God, she probably looked at that fruit like, I ain't touching that, I ain't, it wasn't pleasant to the eyes then. But when the minute she started thinking about herself and, oh, if I eat this, I can become a God. Like it became useful, but it became useful. It became a use. The devil got her and thinking, let me say it right. Let me state this right, y'all. The devil, the trick he used was to think selfishly, was he got her thinking that this could be a useful tool for herself. For when he says you can be as gods, knowing good and evil, he got her to thinking that this could be a useful tool for herself. That's how he got her to start thinking selfishly. Okay, verse 6, and it says, and that it was pleasant to the eyes and a tree to be desired to make one wise. Okay, I spoke ahead of myself, but we see right there, and then and a tree to be desired to make one wise. She didn't hesitate then. The minute that she saw that the tree could be used to make herself wise, what it says right after that, the minute she saw that, oh, this can benefit me, now she's thinking selfishly. What did she do? She took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and did eat. Wow. So we see that the way the devil got sin into this world was through his gospel of self-righteousness. He got her first. He had to get her to conversate with him. He had to get her to give him a little time, entertain him a little bit, But she thinking, oh, I got this. I'm Eve. I'm a big girl. I got this. I'm not gonna fall. I'm not gonna fall. But first, he got her to entertain, and then he got her to take her eyes off of God's command. If she would have kept God's command right there in front of her eyes, the tree never would have became good for food. It would have never became pleasant to her eyes, because her thoughts would have been on pleasing God and not herself. But like I said again, he made her have selfish motives because he made her believe that the tree would benefit her. It would make her wise. She took her eyes off of God. So I pray and I stress to y'all, the way we can keep self-righteousness from destroying us in any type of way is something that everybody has to fight with, myself included, really, is to keep God and Jesus in front of our eyes. Keep our eyes on the sacrifice that Christ had did for us, on Christ. And that is a way we can defeat self-righteousness.